The blood on the torn letter had dried to a rust brown, matching the dust that coated everything in Great Bend, Kansas, that sweltering August afternoon in 1878. Quinn Whitmore had been riding for 3 days straight when he spotted her sitting beneath the cottonwood tree just outside town. Her dark hair plastered to her face with sweat and tears, her fingers clutching that letter like it was the last piece of her soul. He had planned to ride straight through, maybe stop for water and supplies before heading to Montana where ranch work supposedly waited, but something about the way she sat there, utterly still except for the trembling of her hands, made him pull his horse to a stop. "Miss," he called out, dismounting slowly so as not to startle her. "You all right?" She looked up at him with eyes the color of honey in sunlight, red-rimmed and swollen. She could not have been more than 21 or 22, wearing a traveling dress that had once been fine, but was now stained with the evidence of hard miles. Her face was beautiful despite the tear tracks cutting through the dust on her cheeks, delicate features that spoke of gentler circumstances than whatever had brought her to this roadside tree in the middle of nowhere. "He promised," she said, her voice cracking, "but he never came." Quinn glanced back toward town, then at the woman again. He was 24, old enough to know that getting involved in other people's troubles rarely ended well, but young enough that he had not yet hardened his heart completely against the suffering of others. His own failures and disappointments had taught him to keep moving, to not put down roots, but there was something about her that stopped him cold. "Who promised, miss?" he asked, taking a few steps closer but maintaining a respectful distance. She held up the torn letter, and he could see now that it had been ripped deliberately, probably in a fit of rage or despair. "Thomas Garrett. He wrote me this letter 6 months ago, told me to come to Great Bend, that he had land here, that we would be married. I traveled from Philadelphia. 3 weeks on trains and stage coaches. I spent nearly everything I had, and when I arrived yesterday, I learned the truth." Quinn waited, his hat in his hands now, the late afternoon sun beating down on his dark hair. His horse, a sturdy roan gelding named Rusty, snorted and pawed at the ground behind him. "He is already married," she continued, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Has been for 2 years. The woman who runs the boarding house told me. She seemed to take pleasure in it, actually. Thomas Garrett married some rancher's daughter, got himself a nice piece of land out of the deal. When I went to his property this morning, he would not even come out to face me. His wife did. She was holding a baby. She told me to leave town and never come back, that if I caused trouble, her father would see to it that I was arrested as a confidence woman." The words hit Quinn like a physical blow. He had seen cruelty before, plenty of it, but the calculated nature of this man's deception struck him as particularly vile. To lure a woman halfway across the country with false promises, to let her spend her savings and risk her safety, only to deny her to her face, was the act of a coward and a scoundrel. "You have anywhere to go?" he asked quietly. She laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. "I have $17 to my name and no family left back east. My parents died last year, which is why I thought starting fresh out here might be a blessing. I had been working as a seamstress, but the woman I worked for closed her shop. When Thomas's letters kept coming, so full of promises and plans, I thought perhaps God was showing me a new path." She looked down at the torn letter again. "I was a fool." "You were not a fool," Quinn said firmly. "You were trusting. That is different." She met his eyes, and for a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Quinn felt something shift in his chest, a recognition he could not quite name. He had been drifting for 2 years since his own parents died in a fire back in Missouri, taking work where he could find it, never staying long enough to form attachments. He had told himself he preferred it that way, that freedom was worth more than stability. But looking at this woman's devastated face, he felt the loneliness he had been outrunning catch up to him all at once. "My name is Quinn Whitmore," he said, crouching down so they were at eye level. "What is yours?" "Josie Sterling," she replied, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. "Everyone called me Josie back home, but I suppose that does not matter anymore. I do not have a home." "Well, Miss Sterling, here is what I think we should do," Quinn said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "You are going to stand up, dust yourself off, and come into town with me. We are going to get you a room at the boarding house for tonight, and we are going to figure out your next move. You said you are a seamstress." She nodded slowly. "Yes, I am quite skilled actually. I did all the fine work for Mrs. Henderson's shop, the detailed embroidery and alterations on expensive dresses." "Then you have a trade," Quinn said. "A good one. Great Bend might not be Philadelphia, but people still need clothes mended and made. You are not without options, Miss Sterling. You are just without hope right now, and that is temporary if you let it be." Josie looked at him with something like wonder. "Why are you helping me? You do not know me." Quinn stood and extended his hand to help her up, "Because someone should. And because that man who lied to you does not get to be the last word on what kind of people exist in this world." She took his hand, her fingers small and cold despite the heat, and let him pull her to her feet. She swayed slightly, and he realized she probably had not eaten properly in days. The protective instinct that surged through him was so strong it almost frightened him. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "Yesterday morning," she admitted. "I have been trying to conserve my money." Quinn whistled for Rusty and helped Josie onto the horse before mounting behind her. She stiffened at first, proper Eastern sensibilities probably warring with necessity, but when he kept his touch respectful and his manner professional, she relaxed slightly against him. "The boarding house first," he said. "Then food. Then we will see about finding you some work." As they rode into Great Bend, Quinn could feel the eyes on them. It was a small town, maybe 300 people, and strangers were always noticed. The main street ran straight through the middle, lined with the usual establishments. A general store, a saloon, a doctor's office, a church, a blacksmith, and the boarding house run by the woman Josie had mentioned. Quinn noted the location of the land office and what looked like a decent restaurant near the hotel. Mrs. Paula Hendricks ran the boarding house, a severe-looking woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked at Josie with barely concealed disdain when they walked through the door, which immediately set Quinn's teeth on edge. "I thought I told you to leave town," Mrs. Hendricks said coldly. "Miss Sterling is staying," Quinn said before Josie could respond. "She needs a room and she can pay for it. I trust that will not be a problem." Mrs. Hendricks looked him up and down, taking in his trail-worn clothes and the gun at his hip. Whatever she saw in his face made her reconsider her tone. "Rooms are $2 a week, meals extra." "That is fine," Quinn said. He turned to Josie. "You keep your money, I will cover the first week." "I cannot let you do that," Josie protested, but Quinn was already counting out coins onto the desk. "You can pay me back when you are working," he said quietly. "Consider it a loan if that makes you feel better." Mrs. Hendricks handed over a key with obvious reluctance. "Room 3, upstairs. Breakfast is at 7, dinner at 6. No gentlemen callers in the rooms." Quinn did not miss the implication, and his jaw tightened. "Miss Sterling is a respectable woman who was deceived by a man claiming to be honorable. I expect her to be treated with courtesy while she is under your roof. Is that understood?" The older woman sniffed but nodded. Josie took the key with shaking hands and followed Mrs. Hendricks upstairs to see the room. Quinn waited in the small parlor, his mind already working through possibilities. He knew he should be riding on, that this was not his problem to solve, but the thought of leaving Josie alone in this town, vulnerable and friendless, made his stomach turn. When she came back downstairs, she looked a bit more composed. "Thank you," she said softly. "I do not know how I will ever repay your kindness, Mr. Whitmore." "Quinn," he corrected. "And you already thanked me. Now let us get some food in you before you fall over." The restaurant was run by a friendly Mexican family, the Garcias, who had lived in the area long before it became Kansas, back when it was still part of the vast territories. Mrs. Garcia took one look at Josie's pale, drawn face and immediately began fussing over her in a mixture of Spanish and English, serving up generous portions of beef stew, fresh bread, and cold water. As Josie ate, slowly at first and then with increasing hunger, Quinn sipped coffee and watched her. In the lamplight of the restaurant, cleaned up a bit from washing her face and hands, she was even more beautiful than he had first thought. But it was not just her appearance that drew him. There was a strength in her, a core of steel beneath the devastation. She had every right to collapse completely after what had happened, yet here she was, eating dinner and already thinking about what came next. "Tell me about Philadelphia," he said, wanting to distract her from her troubles. She looked up, surprised. "What do you want to know? Anything?" "Everything. I have never been further east than St. Louis." A small smile touched her lips, the first he had seen from her. "It is loud and crowded and dirty and wonderful. There are so many people, so many buildings, factories and shops and theaters. The streets are paved with cobblestones in the nice areas, and there are gas lights that make the evenings bright. In winter, the snow turns gray from all the coal smoke within a day of falling. In summer, the smell from the stockyards can be unbearable." "Sounds like you miss it," Quinn observed. "Parts of it," she admitted, "but my life there was small. I lived in a boarding house not unlike this one, smaller room actually. I worked 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, hunched over fine stitching until my eyes ached. I went to church on Sundays. I had a few friends, other seamstresses, but after my parents died, I felt unmoored, like I was just going through the motions of a life rather than actually living one." "And Thomas Garrett's letters made you think you could have more," Quinn said, understanding. "Yes," she said quietly. "He wrote such beautiful things. About the wide open sky and the land that went on forever. About building something lasting, a home and a family. About partnership and dreams. I thought I was being brave coming out here. I thought I was choosing life instead of just existing." "You were being brave," Quinn said, "and you still are." She met his eyes across the table, and the gratitude in her gaze made his heart clench. "You keep saying things like that. Why?" He thought about it for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "My father used to say that the measure of a person was not in never falling down, but in getting back up every time. You got knocked down hard today, Miss Sterling. But you are sitting here, eating dinner and planning what comes next. That takes courage." "Or stubbornness," she said with a ghost of a smile. "Sometimes they are the same thing," he replied. After dinner, Quinn walked Josie back to the boarding house as the sun set in streaks of orange and pink across the western sky. The heat of the day was finally breaking, and a cool breeze carried the scent of the prairie grass that grew thick beyond the edges of town. "What will you do now?" Josie asked as they stood outside the boarding house. "You said you were heading to Montana." Quinn realized he had not thought about Montana once since finding her under that tree. The ranch job, the next town, the endless moving that had defined his life for 2 years, it all seemed suddenly less important than making sure this woman was going to be all right. "I think I will stay in Great Bend for a bit," he heard himself say. "I can find work here as easily as anywhere else. Horse breaking, ranch hand, whatever is available. Someone should make sure you get settled properly." "You cannot put your life on hold for me," Josie protested, but there was hope in her voice that she could not quite hide. "I am not putting anything on hold," Quinn said honestly. "I have been drifting without purpose for a long time. Maybe it is time I stopped running and stayed somewhere for a while. Might as well be here." She looked at him for a long moment, the last rays of sunlight catching the gold in her honey-colored eyes. "I do not know what I did to deserve your help, Quinn Whitmore, but I am grateful for it. More grateful than I can properly express." "Get some rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow we will see about finding you some work. Things will look better in the morning." She nodded and went inside, and Quinn stood there for a moment, watching the light in her upstairs window come on. Then he led Rusty to the livery stable, paid for boarding, and got himself a room at the small hotel next to the saloon. It was cheaper than the boarding house and rougher, but it suited him fine. As he lay on the thin mattress that night, listening to the sounds of the saloon next door, Quinn thought about the turn his life had taken in the space of a few hours. He had been so certain of his path this morning, sure that Montana was where he needed to be. Now he could not imagine leaving Great Bend, not with Josie Sterling needing help and something unnamed but powerful pulling him toward her. He had not believed in fate before today. He believed in hard work and luck, good and bad, and the choices people made. But finding Josie under that tree felt like more than chance. It felt like something had shifted in the universe, aligning their paths at exactly the right moment. Quinn fell asleep thinking about honey-colored eyes and the way Josie's small smile had transformed her entire face. The next morning, Quinn was up early, washing in the basin in his room and putting on his cleaner shirt. He met Josie for breakfast at the boarding house, where Mrs. Hendricks served runny eggs and burnt toast with barely concealed resentment. Josie looked better after a night of rest, though the sadness still lingered in her eyes like a shadow. "I have been thinking," Quinn said as they ate. "What you need is to let people know you are available for sewing work. In a town this size, word of mouth spreads fast. But we need to start somewhere. The general store might let me put up a notice," Josie suggested, "and perhaps the church. The pastor's wife might need mending or know others who do." "That is good thinking," Quinn agreed. "I will go with you if you do not mind. I want to ask around about work for myself anyway." They spent the morning making the rounds of Great Bend's establishments. At the general store, owned by a kind older man named Mr. Peterson, they found their first bit of real luck. His wife had arthritis in her hands and could no longer do fine sewing work, and he knew of at least 3 other women in town who would pay for quality alterations and repairs. "I will spread the word," Mr. Peterson promised, looking at Josie with grandfatherly warmth. "Can you make dresses from scratch too, or just mend?" "I can make anything," Josie said with quiet confidence. "Given fabric and a pattern, or I can work from a picture if someone has a magazine or catalog they like." "Even better," Mr. Peterson said. "My daughter's getting married next spring, and she has been worried about finding someone to make her dress. The nearest dressmaker is in Larned, 30 miles away. Would you be interested?" Josie's face lit up. "Absolutely, I would be honored." They arranged for Mr. Peterson's daughter to come by the boarding house the next day to discuss designs and measurements. As they left the store, Quinn saw that some of the defeat had left Josie's shoulders. She walked a bit taller, and that tiny smile was back. At the church, they found Reverend Samuel Crawford and his wife Margaret, a cheerful woman in her 40s who immediately took to Josie. When she learned of Josie's skills, Mrs. Crawford hired her on the spot to make new curtains for the parsonage and to alter 3 dresses that no longer fit quite right. "I am so glad you have come to Great Bend," Mrs. Crawford said warmly. We desperately need someone with your talents. There used to be a woman who did sewing, but she moved to Denver last year with her husband, and we have been in sore need ever since. Josie shot Quinn a grateful look, and he felt that strange shifting in his chest again, like something locked away was starting to open. By the end of the day, Josie had promises of work from 6 different sources, enough to keep her busy and earning for weeks to come. Quinn, meanwhile, had found work at a ranch 5 miles outside of town, breaking horses and helping with general labor. The pay was decent, and the rancher, a gruff but fair man named Dutch Carmichael, seemed to appreciate Quinn's straightforward manner and obvious experience with horses. "Can you start tomorrow?" Dutch asked. "Yes, sir," Quinn replied, "but I will need to be in town some evenings. I have a friend who needs some help getting settled." Dutch gave him a knowing look but did not pry. "Long as the work gets done, I do not care what you do with your own time." That evening, Quinn and Josie celebrated her new prospects with dinner at the Garcia's restaurant again. Mrs. Garcia seemed pleased to see them return and served them her special tamales along with rice and beans. "You did well today," Quinn told Josie. "I knew you would." "I could not have done it without you," she said seriously. "People might not have been so welcoming if I had been alone. Having you vouch for me, a man who is clearly respected even though you are new here yourself, it made a difference." Quinn shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "You made the difference. Your skill and your manner, that is what sold them. I just opened a few doors." "Still," she insisted. "Thank you. For everything. For finding me yesterday, for not just riding past like I am sure dozens of others did, for treating me with kindness when I was at my lowest." The gratitude in her voice was painful to hear, because Quinn was starting to realize his motives were not entirely altruistic anymore. He was drawn to her in a way that went beyond simple charity. Every time she smiled, every time she looked at him with those warm eyes, he felt himself falling a little deeper into something he could not quite name. But it was too soon, far too soon. She had been devastated by a man's betrayal just 2 days ago. The last thing she needed was another man complicating her life, even with honorable intentions. So Quinn kept his growing feelings locked down tight and maintained the role of helpful friend. Over the next 2 weeks, a routine developed. Quinn would ride out to the Carmichael ranch each morning and work until late afternoon, then ride back to town to check on Josie. She had settled into her room at the boarding house and was quickly becoming known as the best seamstress in the county. Women came from neighboring farms and even from other small towns to hire her for their sewing needs. Quinn found excuses to spend time with her most evenings. Sometimes they would have dinner together at the Garcias. Other times they would walk down by the creek that ran east of town, talking as the sun set. She told him stories about growing up in Philadelphia, about her parents who had emigrated from Scotland before she was born, about learning to sew from her grandmother who could make magic with needle and thread. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about working on his family's small farm, about the fire that had taken his parents and destroyed everything he had known. He had never talked about it much with anyone, but somehow it was easy to share with Josie. She listened without pity, just steady compassion, and she understood loss in a way that only someone who had also lost could. They never spoke about Thomas Garrett, though Quinn knew the man's ranch was just a few miles from where Quinn worked. He had seen Garrett once, riding into town with his wife, a sour-faced woman who looked perpetually dissatisfied. Garrett was handsome in a slick sort of way, but there was weakness in his face that Quinn found distasteful. He could not imagine what Josie had seen in him, but he supposed letters could hide a multitude of sins. One evening about 3 weeks after Quinn had found Josie under the cottonwood tree, they were walking back from dinner when they ran into Thomas Garrett on the main street. He was coming out of the saloon and he stopped dead when he saw Josie. "Josie," he said, his voice carrying a note of false warmth, "I heard you were still in town." Josie stiffened and Quinn moved a half-step closer to her, a silent show of support. "Mr. Garrett," she said coolly, "I am indeed still in town. I have established a business here. I am a seamstress." Garrett's eyes flicked to Quinn, assessing. "I see you have found yourself a protector." That was fast. The implication in his tone made Quinn's hands curl into fists, but Josie spoke before he could. "Mr. Whitmore is a friend who showed me kindness when I was in desperate need of it, a concept that is clearly foreign to you. Now, if you will excuse us, we were just leaving." She started to walk past Garrett, but he reached out and grabbed her arm. "Now, wait just a minute. I think you owe me an apology. You came here making wild accusations, threatening my marriage." Quinn moved before he consciously decided to, putting himself between Garrett and Josie and forcing the other man to release his grip. "You need to step back," Quinn said quietly, his voice hard as iron. "Right now," Garrett tried to bluster. "This is none of your business, Cowboy. This is between me and her." "There is no you and her," Quinn said. "You made that clear when you sent your wife to turn her away. Now you are going to leave Miss Sterling alone. You are going to cross the street when you see her coming. You are going to act like she does not exist. And if you ever put your hands on her again, we are going to have a very different kind of conversation. Do you understand me?" Something in Quinn's eyes must have convinced Garrett that pushing the issue would be unwise. He stepped back, holding up his hands. "Fine. Whatever. She is not worth the trouble anyway." As Garrett walked away, Quinn turned to Josie and saw her shaking. Without thinking, he put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" "I hate him," she said softly, fiercely. "I hate that I wasted tears on him. I hate that I believed his lies. I hate that seeing him still makes me feel foolish and small." "You are not foolish," Quinn said. "And there is nothing small about you. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met." She looked up at him, and in the light from the saloon windows he could see tears shimmering in her eyes. "How do you always know the right thing to say?" "I do not," he admitted. "I just say what is true." Something shifted between them in that moment, a awareness that hummed in the air like electricity before a storm. Quinn wanted to kiss her so badly it was a physical ache, but he held himself back. It was not time. Not yet. She needed to heal first, to find her footing, to be sure of what she wanted without the shadow of Garrett's betrayal hanging over every decision. So instead, he walked her back to the boarding house and bid her good night like always, professional and respectful, even as his heart pounded in his chest. The next month passed in a blur of work and growing connection. Quinn broke horses and mended fences and learned the rhythms of ranch work. Josie sewed and created, her reputation growing until she had more work than she could handle. She made the wedding dress for Mr. Peterson's daughter, a confection of lace and satin that had the whole town talking. She made new clothes for the Reverend's wife, curtains for the doctor's office, and baptism gowns for 2 different families. With her earnings, she was able to move out of the boarding house and into a small cottage that she rented from Mr. Peterson. It was just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was hers, and she was proud of it. Quinn helped her move her few belongings and set up a proper sewing area near the window where the light was best. "This is perfect," she said, looking around the little cottage with satisfaction. "My own space, my own business. 3 months ago I thought my life was over. Now I feel like it is finally beginning." Quinn, hanging a mirror on the wall for her, felt his heart swell with pride and affection. She had transformed herself from a devastated woman clutching a torn letter into a successful businesswoman with her own home, and a future she was building with her own two hands. He had never admired anyone more. As autumn arrived and the Kansas heat gave way to cooler temperatures, Quinn and Josie continued their pattern of spending evenings together. The whole town was talking about them now, speculating about when Quinn was going to marry her. Mrs. Garcia asked him about it directly one evening when Josie was not there. "That girl, she loves you," Mrs. Garcia said matter-of-factly. "And you love her. Why do you wait?" "It is complicated," Quinn said, though that was not quite true. It was actually very simple. He loved Josie Sterling with everything in him, but he was still scared that she might not be ready, that she might see him as just a friend, that the ghost of Thomas Garrett's betrayal might prevent her from trusting another man with her heart. "Love is never complicated," Mrs. Garcia said. "People make it complicated. Do not waste time, Quinn. Life is too short." Her words stayed with him. That night, unable to sleep, he sat on the porch of the small house he had rented on the edge of town and thought about his life. He had been drifting for so long, avoiding connection, because losing his parents had hurt too much. But in avoiding pain, he had also avoided joy. Josie had taught him that by her example. She had been hurt terribly by Garrett, but she had not let that stop her from building a new life, from opening her heart to friendship, from taking risks. The next evening was Saturday, and Quinn had asked Josie to have dinner with him, but at the hotel restaurant, this time instead of the Garcias. It was the nicest place to eat in Great Bend, with white tablecloths and candles. Josie had seemed surprised by the invitation but had agreed. Quinn wore his best clothes, which were not fancy but were at least clean and pressed. He arrived at Josie's cottage to pick her up and found her waiting in a dress she had made herself, a deep blue that brought out the gold in her eyes. Her hair was pinned up, showing the elegant line of her neck, and she had a shawl against the October chill. "You look beautiful," he said, and meant it with his whole heart. She blushed. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." At dinner they talked easily as always, but there was an undercurrent of something new, an awareness that tonight was different from their usual casual meals. Quinn found himself nervous in a way he had not been since he was a boy, his palms actually sweating as he worked up the courage to say what needed to be said. Finally, as they were finishing dessert, he could not wait any longer. "Josie," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I need to tell you something, and I am just going to say it plain because that is the only way I know how. I love you. I have been falling in love with you since the day I found you under that tree, and every day since has just made it deeper. I know you have been hurt, and I know you might not be ready for this, but I cannot keep pretending we are just friends when what I feel for you is so much more than that." She stared at him, her eyes wide, her hand trembling in his. For a terrible moment, he thought he had made a catastrophic mistake, that he had ruined everything by speaking too soon. Then tears spilled down her cheeks, and she was laughing and crying at the same time. "Oh, Quinn, I love you too. I have loved you for weeks now, but I was afraid to say anything. Afraid you only saw me as a charity case, someone you felt obligated to help. Afraid that you would leave once you felt I was settled enough. Afraid that I was being foolish again, falling for someone who did not feel the same way." Quinn stood and came around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "You could never be foolish, and I am not going anywhere. I am staying right here in Great Bend with you for as long as you will have me." She looked up at him, her face radiant despite the tears. "Forever, then." "I will have you forever." He kissed her then, finally, after months of wanting to. Her lips were soft and sweet, and kissing her felt like coming home after a long journey. The other diners in the restaurant probably saw, and there would be more talk, but Quinn did not care. Let them talk. Let the whole world know that he loved Josie Sterling and that she loved him back. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Josie laughed. "I suppose this means we are courting now." "Officially," Quinn agreed. "Though I should warn you, I do not plan on a long courtship. I wasted too much time already pretending I did not feel what I felt. I am too old and too impatient for years of formal calling." "Good," Josie said, "because I feel the same way. I spent 22 years waiting for my life to really begin. I do not want to wait anymore." They were married 6 weeks later, in the church where Mrs. Crawford had first hired Josie to make curtains. Josie wore a dress she had made herself, ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Quinn wore a new suit that she had tailored for him, and he had never felt more proud than when he stood at that altar and watched her walk down the aisle toward him. The whole town turned out for the wedding. Dutch Carmichael was there with his wife, beaming like he had arranged the match himself. The Garcias brought food for the reception in the church hall. Mr. Peterson and his wife came, along with their daughter whose wedding was now scheduled for spring. Even some of the ranchers and farmers from outside town came, people who had never met Quinn or Josie but who wanted to celebrate love when they saw it. The only person who did not come, conspicuously, was Thomas Garrett. Quinn heard later that Garrett and his wife had attended church in the morning and then left immediately, his wife's face pinched with displeasure. Quinn felt sorry for the man, trapped in a loveless marriage of his own making, but mostly he felt grateful. If Garrett had kept his promise, Josie would be stuck with him now, miserable and betrayed. Instead, his faithlessness had brought her to Quinn, and Quinn would be thankful for that for the rest of his life. They had no money for a wedding trip, but they did not need one. Quinn moved into Josie's little cottage, and they spent their first days as a married couple, making it truly theirs. Quinn built shelves for Josie's sewing supplies and a chest for her fabric. Josie made curtains for every window and a quilt for their bed. They cooked together in the tiny kitchen and sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the stars come out over the prairie. The first time they made love, Quinn was gentle and patient, aware that Josie was nervous despite her love for him. She had never been with anyone before, and he wanted her first time to be as perfect as he could make it. Afterward, she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, and he felt complete in a way he never had before. "I never knew it could be like this," she whispered. "I read novels where people talked about love and passion, but I thought it was just stories. I did not know it was real." "It is real," Quinn assured her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "At least it is for us." Winter came, and with it the harsh Kansas winds and occasional snow. Quinn continued working at the Carmichael Ranch, though Dutch cut his hours during the slow season. Josie's sewing business slowed a bit too, as people had less money to spend during winter. But they managed, their combined savings and careful budgeting seeing them through. On Christmas morning, Quinn gave Josie a music box he had ordered special from a catalog, a beautiful thing with inlaid wood and a mechanism that played a sweet melody. She cried when she opened it, then gave him his present, a shirt she had made with embroidery on the cuffs that depicted horses running free. They spent the day at the church Christmas dinner, surrounded by the community that had become their family. That night, back in their cottage with snow falling softly outside, Josie told him she was pregnant. Quinn felt his heart might burst with joy. He picked her up and spun her around carefully, then peppered her face with kisses until she was laughing. "We are going to be parents," he said wonderingly. "I am going to be a father. You are going to be a wonderful father," Josie said confidently. "Just like you are a wonderful husband." the pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter and into spring. Josie continued to work as long as she could, and Quinn picked up extra jobs around town to save money for the baby. They bought a cradle from a family whose children had outgrown it, and Josie made tiny clothes while Quinn painted the cradle a soft yellow. In late July of 1879, almost exactly a year after Quinn had found Josie under that cottonwood tree, she went into labor. It was long and difficult, and Quinn paced the floor of their cottage while the doctor and Mrs. Garcia attended to Josie in the bedroom. Every cry of pain from her was like a knife to his heart, and he felt utterly helpless. Finally, after 14 hours, the doctor emerged with a tired smile. "You have a son, Mr. Whitmore, a healthy boy, and your wife is doing well, though she is exhausted." Quinn rushed into the bedroom and found Josie propped up in bed, sweaty and pale but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket she had made. "His son. His boy. Meet Thomas Quinn Whitmore," she said softly. Quinn felt tears prick his eyes. "Thomas!" "I know it is strange," Josie said. "But I was thinking about it, and that letter Thomas Garrett sent me, as much as it was full of lies, it still brought me here. It brought me to you. So in a way, even though he is a terrible person, his actions led to something beautiful. I wanted to take back that name, make it mean something good. Make it ours." Quinn kissed her forehead, overcome with love. "It is perfect. He is perfect. You are perfect." Little Thomas was indeed perfect, at least in his parents' eyes. He had Quinn's dark hair and Josie's eyes, and he was healthy and strong. The whole town came by to meet him over the next few weeks, bringing food and gifts and advice. Mrs. Garcia insisted on teaching Josie how to make special teas to help with milk production. Mrs. Crawford organized a group of church ladies to help with cooking and cleaning for the first month. Watching Josie with their son, seeing her rock him and sing to him and nurse him with such tenderness, Quinn fell in love with her all over again. She had been through so much, lost so much, but she had found a way to not just survive but to thrive. And she had brought him back to life in the process, giving him purpose and family, and a reason to put down roots. As Thomas grew from a baby to a toddler, Quinn and Josie's life continued to improve. Quinn was promoted to foreman at the Carmichael Ranch, which came with better pay and a small house on the ranch property. After much discussion, they decided to stay in their cottage in town instead, because it was closer to Josie's customers and to the heart of their community. But the extra money meant they could start saving for their future. When Thomas was 2, Josie became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and when she went into labor on a cold February morning in 1882, their daughter arrived quickly and with much less difficulty than her brother. They named her Mary Alina after both their mothers. With 2 children now, their cottage felt crowded. Quinn began looking for a larger house, and they found one on the edge of town with 3 bedrooms and a large kitchen. It needed work, but Quinn was handy and willing. They bought it with money they had saved and a loan from Mr. Peterson, who had become like a father figure to both of them. Quinn spent every spare moment fixing up the house while Josie managed the children and her sewing business. She had hired a young woman, a widow named Sarah, to help her with the simpler mending jobs, which freed Josie up to focus on the more complex and lucrative work like wedding dresses and fancy gowns. By the time Thomas was 5 and Mary was 3, they were living in the renovated house, and both of them felt like they had built something real and lasting. Quinn had started investing in cattle with Dutch Carmichael, a partnership that was proving profitable. Josie's sewing business was thriving, with customers coming from as far as 50 miles away for her work. One evening in the summer of 1884, after the children were in bed, Quinn and Josie sat on their front porch and watched the sunset. It was one of those perfect Kansas evenings, with a cool breeze and the sky painted in shades of pink and gold. "You ever think about that day?" Josie asked quietly. "The day you found me." "All the time," Quinn admitted. "I think about how close I came to just riding past. I was so focused on getting to Montana, on keeping moving like I had been for 2 years. If I had been 5 minutes earlier or later, if I had not happened to look over and see you, our whole lives would be different. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had gone to Montana?" she asked. Quinn thought about it, then shook his head. "No, because I do not think it was chance that brought me down that road at that exact moment. I think I was supposed to find you. I think we were supposed to find each other." Josie leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to be so angry at Thomas Garrett. For months after we got married, I would still feel this rage when I thought about how he lied to me, how he hurt me. But now I am grateful. If he had kept his promise, I would have married him. I would have been miserable, trapped with a man who did not truly love me. Instead, his betrayal freed me to find you." "His loss was my gain," Quinn said, putting his arm around her. "I got the best woman in the world because he was too foolish to see what he had." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of someone playing a fiddle down the street. "Quinn," Josie said eventually, "I have something to tell you." He looked at her, noting the small smile playing at her lips. "What is it?" "I am pregnant again." Joy surged through him just as strong as the first 2 times. "Really, really," she confirmed. "The baby should come in early spring, around March or April." Quinn kissed her deeply, then pressed his hand gently to her still flat stomach. "3 children. We are building quite a family." "Is that all right?" she asked. "I know we talked about maybe stopping at 2. "It is more than all right," Quinn assured her. "Every child is a blessing, our family is a blessing. This whole life we have built together is a blessing, and I thank God for it every single day." Their 3rd child, a boy they named James Robert, arrived in April of 1885. He was the easiest birth of all 3, and he was a sunny, happy baby who rarely cried. Thomas, now 6, was fascinated by his new brother and wanted to help with everything. Mary, at 3, was less impressed and more jealous of the attention the baby received, but she gradually warmed up to him. The years that followed were full and busy. Quinn continued his work at the ranch and his cattle partnership with Dutch, building their herd slowly and carefully. Josie continued her sewing, though she scaled back as the children got older and needed more of her attention. Thomas started school, and Mary would follow in another 2 years. Great Bend was growing too. The railroad had come through, bringing more commerce and more people. The town that had been about 300 when Quinn and Josie arrived was now closer to 1,000. New businesses opened, new houses were built, and the little prairie town was becoming a real community. Through it all, Quinn and Josie's love deepened and matured. The passionate intensity of their early courtship mellowed into something richer and more complex. They knew each other's flaws now, had weathered disagreements and difficult times, but their commitment to each other never wavered. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, Quinn took Josie back to the cottonwood tree where he had first found her. They had not been back there in years, busy with children and work and life, but he wanted to mark the occasion in a meaningful way. "You remember what you said to me?" Quinn asked as they stood beneath the tree. "That first day, he promised, but never came," Josie quoted quietly. "I can still feel how devastated I was, sitting here with that torn letter, thinking my life was over." "And now?" Quinn asked. She looked at him with those honey-colored eyes, older now but still as beautiful as ever. "Now I know that sometimes the worst things that happen to us are actually blessings in disguise. Now I know that promises kept by the wrong person can be worse than promises broken. Now I know what real love looks like, feels like, what it means to truly share your life with someone." Quinn pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "I have never regretted a single day since I stopped here and saw you. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me." "Finding each other," Josie corrected. "It was not just you finding me. It was both of us being in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, both of us being ready for something we did not even know we needed." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, remembering the past and grateful for the present. When they finally walked back to town, hand in hand, Quinn felt the same surge of rightness he had felt that first day. This was where he was supposed to be. This was who he was supposed to be with. Everything that had come before, all the pain and loss and wandering, had been leading him to this moment, this life, this woman. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with horses like his father. Mary became interested in sewing like her mother, sitting beside Josie and learning the craft. James was the wild one, always getting into mischief and making them laugh. When Thomas turned 13 in 1890, he started working at the ranch with Quinn on weekends and summers. Quinn taught him everything he knew about horses and cattle, about honest work and treating people fairly. He saw so much of himself in his son, but also so much of Josie, the combination creating something unique and wonderful. Mary, at 11, was already helping Josie with simpler sewing projects and showing real talent for the work. She had her mother's eye for design and her steady, patient hands. James, at 8, was still trying to figure out where he fit, dabbling in everything from helping at the general store to learning blacksmithing from the farrier. Dutch Carmichael passed away in the winter of 1891, and he left Quinn a significant share of the ranch in his will. Quinn had been like a son to Dutch, who had never had children of his own, and Dutch wanted to make sure Quinn and his family were taken care of. With the inheritance, Quinn bought out Dutch's widow's remaining share and became the sole owner of the ranch he had been working at for over a decade. It was overwhelming and humbling. Quinn, who had been a drifter with nothing to his name 12 years earlier, now owned a successful ranch and had money in the bank. He and Josie discussed what to do with their new wealth and decided to expand the ranch, hire more hands, and build a proper ranch house where they could eventually retire. But they did not move right away. Their house in Great Bend had too many memories, and their children were settled in school and with friends. So Quinn hired a manager to run the day-to-day operations of the ranch while he oversaw the bigger picture, and they stayed in town for another few years. In 1893, when Thomas turned 16, he told his parents he wanted to work at the ranch full-time instead of finishing school. Quinn and Josie discussed it at length. Neither of them had much formal education themselves, and they understood the value of hard work and practical skills. But they also wanted their children to have opportunities they had not had. Finally, they reached a compromise. Thomas would finish the school year, and then he could work at the ranch full-time, but he would also continue studying at home in the evenings, reading and learning about business and agriculture. Thomas agreed, and that summer he moved into the ranch house they had built and began learning the business of running a large operation. Mary, at 14, announced that she wanted to open her own dressmaking shop someday. Josie encouraged her, teaching her advanced techniques and business skills. James, at 11, decided he wanted to be a veterinarian after helping the town doctor treat injured animals. It would require years of schooling, but Quinn and Josie promised to support him if that was truly his passion. As their children grew and started forming their own dreams, Quinn and Josie found themselves alone more often, the house quiet after years of chaos and noise. Some couples might have drifted apart, but Quinn and Josie grew even closer. They rediscovered the ease of their early courtship, the long conversations and simple pleasure of each other's company. On a warm evening in June of 1895, they sat on their porch as they had so many times before, watching the sunset and reflecting on the life they had built. 17 years, Josie said wonderingly. 17 years since you found me under that tree. Best 17 years of my life, Quinn said, and hopefully just the beginning. We have a lot more years ahead of us. Thomas is talking about getting married, Josie said. He has been courting Emily Johnson for over a year now. I know, Quinn said. He asked me for permission to propose last week. I told him yes, of course. She is a good woman and he loves her. We are going to be grandparents soon, Josie said, a note of wonder in her voice. How did that happen? When did we get old? Quinn laughed. Speak for yourself. I am still young and spry. She elbowed him playfully. You are 41 years old, Quinn Whitmore. Your knees crack when you stand up. Only sometimes, he protested, but he was grinning. All right, fine, we are getting older, but we are doing it together and that makes all the difference. Yes, she agreed, leaning against him. Together makes all the difference. Thomas married Emily Johnson in the fall of 1896, in the same church where Quinn and Josie had been married 18 years earlier. It was a beautiful ceremony, and watching his son pledge his life to the woman he loved brought tears to Quinn's eyes. He remembered standing at that altar, promising to love and cherish Josie, and he had kept that promise every day since. The following summer, Emily gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth Grace, and Quinn and Josie became grandparents. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, seeing his son as a father, Quinn felt the circle of life complete itself in a way that was both bittersweet and beautiful. Mary opened her dressmaking shop in 1898, taking over the space that Josie had been renting for years as Josie slowly retired from the business. At 21, Mary was talented and ambitious, and her shop quickly became even more successful than her mother's had been. She hired 3 assistants and was making dresses for wealthy women from as far as Wichita. James left for veterinary college in Chicago in 1899, and Josie cried for a week after he departed. Their youngest, off in the big city, pursuing dreams they could barely imagine. But they were proud of him, and he wrote long letters home describing his studies and the strange, crowded world of the city. With all 3 children now grown and pursuing their own lives, Quinn and Josie finally moved out to the ranch in 1900. They were 51 and 47 respectively, old enough to appreciate the slower pace of ranch life, but still young enough to enjoy it. The ranch house was large and comfortable, with a wrap-around porch and big windows that let in the prairie light. They hired good people to help run the place, and Quinn taught them what Dutch had taught him. Treat people fairly, work hard, and the land will provide. The ranch continued to prosper, and Quinn made sure his workers were well paid and well treated. Several of them built houses on ranch property, and a small community developed, complete with a schoolhouse for the workers' children. On quiet evenings, Quinn and Josie would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the endless prairie, just as they had for 20 years. Sometimes Thomas and Emily would visit with Elizabeth and their second child, a boy named William. Sometimes Mary would come out from town with fabric samples and designs, still seeking her mother's opinion. And twice a year, James would come home from Chicago, full of stories about his studies and the city. In 1905, Mary got married to a lawyer named Patrick Stevens, a good man who clearly adored her. The The wedding was lavish by Great Bend standards, and the whole town turned out. At the reception, Quinn danced with his daughter and she whispered, "Thank you for showing me what a good marriage looks like. I would not have known what to look for in a husband if I had not watched you and Mother all these years." Quinn had to blink back tears. "Your mother did all the hard work. I just loved her." "That is not true," Mary said seriously. "You loved her, yes, but you also respected her, supported her dreams, shared the work of raising us, and made her laugh. That is more than just love, Father. That is partnership." James returned to Great Bend in 1906 after finishing his studies, opening the first veterinary practice in town. He was 24, confident and educated, and he quickly became essential to the community. The ranchers and farmers loved him because he clearly cared about the animals he treated, and he was skilled at his work. In 1907, Thomas and Emily had their third child, a daughter they named Josephine after her grandmother. When Josie held her namesake for the first time, tears streamed down her face. She was 54 years old now, her hair more gray than brown, lines marking her face from years of laughter and love. But she was still the most beautiful woman Quinn had ever seen. That evening, after all the family had left and they were alone again, Quinn and Josie sat in the parlor of the ranch house. A fire crackled in the fireplace, warding off the October chill, and Josie was rocking little Josephine to sleep before Thomas came to collect her. "A granddaughter named after me," Josie said softly. "It feels like an honor I do not quite deserve." "You deserve every honor," Quinn said. "You took your life when it was in pieces and rebuilt it into something beautiful. You built a business, raised 3 wonderful children, and created a home filled with love. If that does not deserve honoring, I do not know what does." "I could not have done any of it without you," she said, looking at him with those eyes he had loved for nearly 30 years. "You saved me, Quinn." "In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "I was lost before I found you, drifting without purpose or direction. You gave me a reason to stop running. You gave me a home and a family and a reason to build something lasting." Later that night, after Thomas had taken his daughter home and Quinn and Josie were alone in their big bed, they held each other close. They made love slowly, tenderly, 2 people who knew each other's bodies as well as they knew their own. Afterward, Josie traced the lines of Quinn's face with her fingers. "I love you," she whispered. "I have loved you for almost 30 years, and I love you more now than I did at the beginning." "I love you too," Quinn said. "Forever, remember. That is what you promised me that first night." "Forever," she agreed, "and I have never broken a promise to you." "No," he said, pulling her closer. "You have not. You are the one person who never disappointed me, never let me down, never made me regret putting my faith in you." "The same is true for me," she said. "You have been everything I needed and more than I deserved." "We both deserved happiness," Quinn said. "We both deserved love, and we found it together." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, 2 people who had started as strangers brought together by circumstance and had built a love story for the ages. The years that followed were peaceful and full. James got married in 1909 to a teacher named Alice, and they gave Quinn and Josie 2 more grandchildren. Thomas and Emily had a 4th child, another boy. Mary and Patrick had twin girls who kept everyone busy and laughing. The ranch continued to prosper under Quinn's careful stewardship, and he began teaching Thomas the business side of ranching, preparing him to eventually take over. Mary's dress shop expanded to 2 locations, one in Great Bend and one in Larned. James's veterinary practice grew to include a partner, another young veterinarian who had trained in Kansas City. Quinn and Josie grew older together, their bodies slowing but their minds still sharp and their love still strong. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918 with all their children and grandchildren around them, a testament to what they had built together. Great Bend had grown into a proper town of over 5,000 people now, connected to the world by railroad and telegraph. The Wild West they had known was fading into memory, replaced by automobiles and modern conveniences. But the values they had built their life on, hard work and honesty and love, those remained constant. On a summer evening in 1920, when Quinn was 66 and Josie was 63, they returned to the cottonwood tree for what would be the last time. It was still there, older and more gnarled but still standing, still providing shade for weary travelers. 42 years ago, Josie said, standing beneath its branches. I sat here clutching a torn letter, thinking my life was over. I could not have imagined then what my life would become. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, a successful business, and over 40 years with the best man I have ever known. Quinn put his arm around her, feeling the familiar comfort of her presence. That torn letter brought you to me. If I could go back and thank Thomas Garrett for his faithfulness, I would, because his broken promise led to our kept ones. Do you remember what you said to me that day? Josie asked. The very first thing, Quinn thought back, reaching through decades of memory. I asked if you were all right. No, she said with a small smile. Before that, you said the blood on my letter matched the dust on the road. I thought it was such an odd thing to notice in that moment. Quinn laughed. I did say that, did I not? I was nervous seeing you so upset. I did not know what to say, so I said the first thing that came to mind. You were always good at that, Josie said. Saying the right thing even when you did not know it was right. You had a way of seeing straight to the heart of things, of cutting through everything else to what mattered. The only thing that has ever mattered is you, Quinn said seriously. Everything good in my life started the day I stopped at this tree. Everything. They stood there for a long time, remembering, grateful, deeply in love after more than 4 decades together. As the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and gold, painting the prairie in fire, Quinn thought about the long road that had brought him to this moment. All the miles he had traveled, all the towns he had passed through, all the paths he might have taken, they had all led here. To Josie. To this life, to this love. Ready to go home? Josie asked eventually. Always, Quinn said. As long as home is wherever you are. They walked back to the buggy they had driven out from the ranch, moving slower than they once had but still steady, still sure. As they drove back across the prairie in the fading light, Quinn reached over and took Josie's hand, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. Behind them, the cottonwood tree stood sentinel, witness to where their story had begun and guardian of the promise that had been kept. The torn letter was long gone, destroyed or lost to time, but the love it had inadvertently created would last forever, carried on in children and grandchildren, in the business Josie had built and the ranch Quinn had nurtured, in the community they had helped build and the lives they had touched. Quinn Whitmore had been a drifter once, running from pain and avoiding connection. But the day he found Josie Sterling clutching that torn letter, everything changed. He had stopped running and started building. He had opened his heart and been rewarded with a love beyond anything he could have imagined. And Josie, who had thought her life was ending under that cottonwood tree, had instead found it was just beginning. The man who had promised but never came had been replaced by a man who came and stayed, who loved and cherished, who built a life with her that surpassed every dream she had ever dared to dream. In the end, their story was proof that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes, that broken promises can be blessings in disguise, and that true love, when you find it, is worth every hardship that came before. They lived out the rest of their days together in that ranch house on the Kansas prairie, surrounded by family and friends, secure in the knowledge that they had found what everyone searches for: a love that lasts, a partnership that endures, and a happily ever after that was real and true and earned. Quinn passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1935 at the age of 81, with Josie holding his hand. She followed him 6 months later, unable to imagine a life without the man who had saved her, loved her, and built a beautiful life with her. They were buried side by side in the Great Bend Cemetery, their headstones simple but meaningful. Together forever, engraved beneath their names. Their children and grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren, would tell the story of how Quinn and Josie met for generations to come. How a cowboy had found a woman clutching a torn letter, how she had said, "He promised," but never came, and how that heartbreak had led to the greatest love story their family had ever known. It became legend in Great Bend, the tale of two people who found each other at exactly the right moment and built something lasting and true. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings, their descendants would drive out to that old cottonwood tree, still standing after all these years, and think about the day everything changed. The day a broken promise became a blessing. The day two lonely souls found each other and decided to stop being lonely together. The day love won, as it always does when it is real and true and meant to be. The torn letter was gone, but the love it had sparked burned on, passed down through generations. A reminder that sometimes the darkest moments are just before the dawn, and that happily ever after is not just a fairy tale, but something real people can build when they find the right person to build it with. Quinn and Josie's story was complete, their ending as perfect as any love story could be. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And in the end, that was everything they had ever hoped for and more than they had ever dared to dream that hot August day in 1878, when a drifting cowboy stopped beneath a cottonwood tree and found his destiny waiting for him with tear-stained cheeks and a torn letter clutched in her trembling hands.